Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I remind the Chamber that my wife is a serving officer with Police Scotland. My colleague, Murdo Fraser, was the subject of a spurious complaint about a social media post which was critical of the SNP government. He discovered that Police Scotland had recorded the complaint against him as a non-crime hate incident. No crime was committed, but he is now on the police record as a perceived offender in a supposed hate incident, despite never being charged, tried, convicted, or even informed the police had a file on him. Humza Yousaf, how can it be right that innocent people are put on the police record when they have done nothing wrong?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, let me try to provide some context on the issue that Douglas Ross raises. I think it is important that when we're talking about hatred, hate crime, or indeed the Hate Crime Public Order Act, that we do so in a way that is not just considered, but also ensures that we stick to the facts. So let me try to provide some context on the issue that Douglas Ross references. Firstly, let us remember that the recording of non-crime hate incidents has come as a direct result of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. It was contained within recommendations, 12 to 17, of the Macpherson report. So they have been around, the recording of non-crime hate incidents, for many, many years. Secondly, as well as being around for many years, non-crime hate incidents are recorded, non-crime incidents are recorded for other incidents as well that don't meet a criminal threshold, such as, for example, for domestic abuse incidents. And I don't know if Douglas Ross is suggesting or not that he doesn't think that domestic abuse incidents shouldn't be recorded if they don't meet a criminal threshold, or whether it's just in relation to hate crime or not. Thirdly, let me be clear that, of course, the Hate Crime Act is not yet in force, so there's nothing within the Hate Crime Act that changes how hate crime, or indeed a non-crime hate incident, is recorded. Let me, if I can, make that point by quoting Professor James Chalmers, who is well known to this chamber. He says, and I quote, "Such recording, in terms of non-crime hate incidents, is a long-standing feature of police practice. Communicating clearly just how little the Act changes is essential to avoid undue fears about its impact and any attempts to abuse it." Lastly, Presiding Officer, because I know this is a substantial issue, that notwithstanding this, Police Scotland have made it clear last year, and again they've made it clear because of recent press inquiries, that they will be reviewing how non-crime hate incidents are recorded, cognisant of the changes that have been made in England and Wales. So I go back to the central point that I started with, Presiding Officer, that there is far too much hatred. We all accept that in our society. We all should come together in order to help to tackle it. And I would urge the Conservatives in particular, notwithstanding legitimate questions that Douglas Ross asks, to come together in that effort to support the Act and support a zero-tolerance approach to hatred in our society.
Douglas Ross.
But we all have a zero-tolerance approach. We all have a zero-tolerance approach to hatred in society. But my question, which the First Minister took over 2 minutes to try and answer, was should innocent people have a police record when they have done nothing wrong? And it sounds from that answer, from Humza Yousaf, that he believes they should. And he's previously said this is about monitoring, about gathering data. But what will the value of that data be if we can now see that individuals can put forward multiple complaints with little or no substance in them, and that data will then be stored and recorded in the way it has with Murdo Fraser? And this unacceptable incident is just the tip of the iceberg. The SNP's Hate Crime Act will come into force in just a few days' time and could lead to more cases just like this. The controversial new law is ripe for abuse. In a letter to this Parliament's Criminal Justice Committee, the Association of Scottish Police Superintendents said that some individuals will, and I quote, will seek to weaponise the new legislation and associated police investigation. Does Humza Yousaf agree with some of the most senior police officers in Scotland? And does he accept that this law could be weaponised?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Douglas Ross says that we all have a zero-tolerance approach to hate crime. I'm not entirely convinced that when you take money from a racist misogynist and then refuse to give it back, that is a zero-tolerance approach to whatsoever, In relation to the issue of non-crime hate incidents and the impact and the effect they have and what is the purpose of them, I refer Douglas Ross to the Chief Constable, who was very clear at the Scottish Police Authority board meeting just last week the value of the recording of hate incidents. And she said, and I quote directly, "On reporting hate incidents, they can and do give us a sense initially of community tensions. So they are useful to us in terms of engaging with communities, engaging with different groups and communities, and being able to understand where there is potential for tensions to be raised." At the end of quote. So I would say that there is an understanding of the reasons and rationale why hate incidents are recorded. That is precisely why the Macpherson report recommended them in the first place around about 25 years ago, Presiding Officer. Let me say, in terms of the Hate Crime Act itself, of course we take seriously what is said by the Scottish Police Federation, ASPs or any other representative organisation representing police officers. But I think it is incumbent on me to say that this Act, of course, the new offences in relation to stirring up, are hugely important. Those stirring up offences for racial hatred have existed since 1986. We are simply extending those protections to other marginalised groups. I think it is important for Douglas Ross to be honest, to tell people in this chamber and also the people of Scotland, who is it that he thinks is not deserving of those protections in the same way that I have been protected because of my race since 1986.
Douglas Ross.
The problem is, First Minister, people will not be protected if the police cannot do their job. We have warnings week after week from officers on the front line, from the Police Federation and now from the Association of Scottish Police Superintendents. Their line at the top of their letterhead says, representing the operational leaders of the police service in Scotland. They are giving as stark a warning as possible to this SNP government that the bill is flawed. It is not going to do what MSPs who supported it wanted it to do. And those warnings are being ignored by Humza Yousaf. But let's see if he will also ignore others on this. Katharina Casper is the chair of the Scottish Police Authority's Complaints and Conduct Committee. She said an investigation itself can become a punishment which may have a chilling effect on the freedom of expression. And Humza Yousaf has directed his comments today at me as Conservative leader and the Conservative Party. What does he say to one of his most senior SNP MPs, Joanna KC? She said this, and I quote, "For many, the process will be the punishment. Being under police investigation will be stressful, costly, damaging to reputations and could lead to problems in the workplace. Presiding Officer, the police should not be dispatched to people's doors to check their thinking." Doesn't the First Minister recognise the chilling effect his law will have on free speech?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, these issues were rehearsed last week, but to emphasise and reiterate to Douglas Ross that there are, of course, protections of freedom of expression, freedom of speech explicitly within the bill. In fact, there is a triple lock protection because there is explicit reference in the bill itself in relation to freedom of expression, and they were a matter of compromise between the government and members of the opposition. I think they were a good example of how we do legislation here in this Parliament. Of course, there is a reasonable person defence within the legislation itself, and of course our legislation has to comply with the European Convention of Human Rights and the important articles within that in relation to freedom of expression. Secondly, Presiding Officer, I have absolute faith in police's ability to weed out vexatious complaints. They unfortunately have to deal with vexatious complaints. Of course, a whole range of legal matters and complaints that are made right across the legal landscape. I have absolute faith in their ability to address those issues in ways that are appropriate. And let me go back to the central point here, that stirring up offences are not new. They have existed since 1986, for most of my entire life. And therefore, I've got absolute confidence in Police Scotland's ability to be able to police new stirring up offences in the ways that are appropriate. And let me say again to Douglas Ross that his party, the Conservatives, did support stirring up offences when they were brought, when those offences were extended in England and Wales in Westminster. So if they're okay in order to protect people in England and Wales, why are they not okay to protect people here in Scotland? And I say to Douglas Ross, if he believes in a zero-tolerance approach, if he believes that somebody who's Jewish or elderly or gay or disabled should be protected from behaviour that's threatening or abusive and intended to stir up hatred, then why is he opposing this legislation? Because from my view, it certainly looks like just for the sake of opposition, Presiding Officer.
Before we move to Mr Ross's next question, of course, there are many members who would like the opportunity to put questions to the First Minister today, and therefore I'd be grateful if we could have more concise questions and responses. Douglas Ross.
Humza Yousaf can see absolutely no flaw in his legislation that he took through this Parliament, despite the overwhelming evidence we are getting from frontline officers and many others. The Hate Crime Act will come into force on April Fool's Day, but it is no joke. The Scottish Conservatives opposed it at the time and still do. It is so flawed that whatever its intentions, it is likely to create more division. Overworked, under-resourced police officers will be forced to deal with hundreds of malicious complaints. Humza Yousaf's law could be weaponised against people with opposing views. Police investigations will tarnish the names of innocent people and could silence them. This law is overreach by the SNP. So how long will it take before the Hate Crime Act goes the same way as named persons, offensive behaviour at football, gender recognition reform and every other flawed SNP law?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Hate Crime Act is one that not just I am proud of, but this entire Parliament should be proud of. And of course, every single political party came together to support that act, except the Scottish Conservatives. And why should they be proud of it? They should be proud of it because it was supported by a number of groups that represent some of the most marginalised in our communities. The Scottish Council of Jewish Communities stated, and again I'll quote, that they support the bill, strongly support the introduction of this new offence, that's a stirring up offence, and its application across all protected characteristics. Why is it important? Well, it's important because Lord Brackadale, who led the independent review, which then of course helped us to develop the Hate Crime Act, said that stirring up of hatred may lead to violence or public disorder. It may incite people to commit offences such as assault. He called it conduct that is morally wrong. And I think he is absolutely right to do that. So we have freedom of expression clauses within the bill that protect people's right to freedom of expression. But what we do with this Hate Crime Act is we ensure that Scotland does send a message, this Parliament sends a message, this country sends a message to those who are often the targets of hatred that we truly have a zero-tolerance approach. Presiding Officer, that's something I'm very proud of indeed.